hindi. Passion is our profession. Now pull, we're doing 20 in a row. These are the ones. Nerve in particular is the saphenous nerve. To rotate as far as I can. I'm going to go as far as we can. All right, guys. Today we have Samantha. Help me out.
Avenengo,
I can't spell her name. You've been working with us how long now?
probably over 6 months, I think.
I should learn. I'm gonna have to do the phonetic spelling at some point. So Samantha is a massage therapist. She works in here in the farm, and she has a lot more that she does. But just kind of tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Well, like Beau said, I am the massage therapist here. And so I do a lot of soft tissue work. I do some sports therapy, prenatal massage, infant massage, and a couple of other things on the massage side. And then on the other side, I actually do health education and basically health advocacy, teach clients how to be their own health advocate.
How did you get into massage therapy?
Well, I originally started in psychology, actually, and then I took a right turn after leaving my doctorate program. I got into a car accident and was injured pretty badly. And then I started working with a chiropractor and a massage therapist, and it changed my life, kind of the poster child story for things. So I took a little bit of a break from academic side of things and went into more working directly with people, hands-on, and seeing lives change.
It's a pretty typical story, right? Most people that get into a field of conservative medicine, they had some experience that they had help with. I was the little what's the kid with crutches on Mary Poppins? Is it Mary Poppins? I don't know. But I was that kid. I was a kid on crutches that broke my leg, and a chiropractor ended up helping me out. I think Sloan behind the camera, her arms were almost going to fall off like a G.I. Joe soldier, and I think somebody was helping her out from gymnastics. So, we all have those stories. So you said you do, well, and you said you do, we know you do a lot of different things in here. Massage has a broad scope. There are people that do all sorts of massage. You see a variety of clients that come from us, and then, like you said, pre and postnatal. What's your ideal client? Do you have one, or is it just anybody that's looking to feel better via massage?
I wouldn't say that I have necessarily an ideal client. I would say somebody that comes in that wants a broad spectrum of things is fine. So someone comes in and says, I just need to relax. I take that more as not necessarily they need a spa massage, but they truly need to calm their nervous system down.
Stones and stuff like that.
I could, but I don't generally.
There's probably some out back.
Yeah. But, and I've done the spa thing. I've worked in spas, so I could do that. But I generally want to see a difference in somebody when they walk out the door. So somebody that comes in, that knows what they want, or even if you haven't had massage, that's receptive to what massage can do for you. So if you've had an injury, if you've got stress, if you're pregnant, anything is fine.
So more along the therapeutic lines, aiming at something, so an outcome measure rather than just I feel better after that massage.
Right. I just feel better for 10 minutes and then back to my crazy day.
And we've had a lot of success working with you because it's so easy to explain things to you, get it. You have a lot of tools to pull from like we do, so the toolbox is kind of both wide and deep, which makes it awesome. But in addition to the soft tissue toolbox, you started getting into it more in here where we're still trying to help you figure out what we're marketing it, which we're going to talk about today. But what else do you do with some of your clientele?
A lot of times it actually starts in the room with massage, but from there, when somebody comes to me and they want to fix a problem, like they've got pain in their neck, pain in their shoulder, pain in the low back, or they're just so stressed out that they need to lay down on the table and get work done, a lot of times we'll work together a few times and I won't have them come back for months on end without some kind of result. So when we don't see a result, that's when I start talking to them about maybe the health education side of things. So, well, why is this not being fixed? Why aren't things changing? Is it your diet? Is it your stress management or lack of stress management? So we work together on what lifestyle changes might need to happen outside of me just doing the massage part of it.
So wait, you don't just string people along and just keep them paying for massages every week endlessly without results?
You know, I thought about it for
I thought you
about
wanted to make
0.3 seconds, but no.
So a lot more all-encompassing.
Yeah.
And the more I get into it, we had a conversation about this yesterday. I'm trying to figure out how we tell people what we do best, because we try to look at all aspects of a human, not just like an injury or a body part or even just musculoskeletal, right? There's a lot more to a human that gets involved. And the conversation we were having yesterday, which I want to take a dive into that, was basically about functional medicine, which is kind of the, maybe not a new model, but it's becoming a more popular model for medicine. And I don't think you would say you practice functional medicine, because A, you can't. B, we don't even, after we talking yesterday, we don't know if we would. What are your thoughts on where you fit into a functional medicine model, and then also where like functional medicine is going nowadays?
I would say the first part of that question, what is my place in it? I've been trying to figure out probably for the past 10 years. And as we talked about yesterday, things are changing, and almost anyone can call themselves a functional medicine practitioner. So I don't want to toss myself into that pool. What I like to say is most important about what I do is educate patients and clients on how to be their own advocate so that they know how to learn about what's going on with themselves.
Sounds really familiar.
Right? It's like, you know, and to give them information about how to find that information, if that makes sense. So that when they go back to their doctor, because again, I'm not their doctor, I can't tell you take this, don't take this kind of thing. More so, I want to bring you the research in a digestible manner that you can understand, and then go back to your doctor and have an educated conversation.
Yeah. And this is where it gets kind of tough, because like the 2 episodes ago, we talked about kind of the Wild West, which was a slapstick way of talking about, like, even though a lot of the medical platform right now is on a stranglehold as far as regulatory bodies and regulations, but then you go into what is a much better model, right? We're not knocking it down, but at the same time, it's kind of wide open because it hasn't been well defined, which is why it's so hard for people like you and me to define even what we do. So it's good and it's bad, because you can the portal of entry is huge, but that also means that, like, it's just the way it is. You're gonna have people that don't have classical training, right? People that have a title or say they're doing something that really probably shouldn't be. But then you also have people that are absolute rock stars, and now in an attempt to create a better model, we may have created more confusion almost. And now you're seeing, like, I was listening to a podcast with Chris Kresser the other day, who has a functional medicine institute on his own, and he started his path into functional medicine in a very crazy offshoot way. He had a lot of like parasitic infections and was doing like fecal transplants in Japan and things like that, which he firmly said, like, that's not functional medicine. These are just like, you know, these crazy like offshoot things that I had to do to find out like how I was going to truly get healthy myself. But you have that far into the spectrum, all the way to, hey, you just need to learn how to eat better, not necessarily like look at macros, move more, maybe get some soft tissue therapy to feel a little better in between all of that. But there's such a broad spectrum, and then, like we said, we're trying to figure out where do we fit on that spectrum. So as far as the functional medicine conversation, I know that you were, you know, in a little bit of a PhD track, you're still going to school for, I believe, like certification in counseling, correct?
Licensure.
Yeah. Would you ever want to go back to school for functional medicine to be certified in the only certifying body?
The short answer is no, because what I do, I'm comfortable with where I'm at in that model. So you asked, where do I think functional medicine is going and what's going on with that. I think, like you said, it's wide open right now, and that's usually how a movement or something like that starts, where everyone is just funneling in and trying to figure out what skill set fits where, because there's so much information coming at everyone that it's hard to really, there's not a lot of regulation. And that's what makes people like you guys who have classical training, who know what's going on, hard to fit into a model with somebody that maybe didn't have any training at all besides an online workshop for a day that they got a certification from. So I'm comfortable with where I'm at, helping people navigate that system as we're all learning what that system is.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, to me, I think is that model progresses, it's going to become hopefully not like the medical model, but you have a hierarchy in the medical model, right? If you kind of start at the bottom, if you walked into a clinic, I mean, this is just classic. It would be like nurse practitioner, PA, and then it would go MD, right? That's kind of like your typical, besides front office staff, right?
Right.
But when you get into this realm, you can have a bachelor's in science, or you could have an MD, and you can both be technically practicing functional medicine. It gets a little scary, but that's why I asked the question, because I like what you said and how you explain it is you're comfortable with where you're at, but I think the reason you're comfortable is because you understand your scope and your boundaries, and you operate really well within that, right? But you've also realized you needed a couple different tools to do everything that you feel like you needed. You're not going to go get all the tools because you're comfortable where you're at. And if we didn't have you, somebody would have to fill that gap. So it's not like everybody has to go to the top level echelon of training and certification. We need people at every level. The other thing that you talked about that is, again, sounds like an echo on the show, is people becoming their own health advocate. And the example we talked about in a couple shows back was a friend of mine who said, I want to know about health, and this is a very healthy guy to begin with. I want to know about health, but I have a ceiling, right? I have a job. The crazy thing to me is you live in a body. If you don't take care of your body, you ain't going to be a lawyer. You're not going to be an athlete. You're not going to be a massage therapist, you know, if you don't take care of yourself. So it's fine and well to say I have a ceiling, but like I think the ceiling needs to go way up from where it has been for the past maybe 50 years, you know, because if you think about it, I have some books back in our shelf back there that my grandmother gave to me that are from, I think, the 1950s to 1970s on supplements and exercise, and there are these old, and a lot of that stuff is the stuff that has resurfaced, right? Because these were the books that were kind of like the under the radar stuff, but it was just what we're talking about now: eating real food, some like whole food supplementation. Sunlight is in some of these books, and these are all the things that we say we're biohacking, but it's like, no, we kind of thought that the Western medical model, pharmaceuticals, taking it easy when we got injured, relying on surgery, that this was this technological advancement, when really we were trying to outsmart the human body. And the only way you're going to tap into the knowledge of the human body is to educate yourself, like you said, become an advocate. And what we're trying to do in our profession with the show is create a filter for that education, right? And you brought up or gave me some articles that were specific to kind of what you were alluding to in the beginning. Like, if somebody comes to you, which is extremely smart and probably needs to happen more often than not, and you're not having results with manual therapy or conservative management, you have to start thinking, not necessarily next step, like it's an automatic referral, but what else is going on with this person, right? So what do you, if you get to that point with somebody, what is that next step? Like, walk me through kind of a process that you would take with somebody if you're like, man, I don't think this is musculoskeletal, and you're not going to refer out. Okay.
Really quick, I actually want to go back with you saying about the ceiling, because that's where my process starts. I think the ceiling happened when everyone started trusting their doctor completely with their health, which is not to say that, you know, doctors don't know things. They know a lot of things, but they know a lot of things in one avenue, which
especially nowadays
is right. Yeah. It's very specialized and focused. So when somebody comes to me and they've been to the doctor, their blood work looks normal, they're telling me all of these things.
And we're laughing because normal for pathologic medical values is probably not normal.
Right. But it's what they've been told. Yeah. So they're assuming there's got to be something crazy wrong with them because nobody can find it. So my first step is to ask them about their lifestyle. So, sometimes they want to chat about it during the session, which is fine with me. It's kind of a nice way to get somebody introduced to what might be going on with them. So what's your lifestyle look like? What's your work-life balance look like? What does your diet look like? So to start off, we go over kind of major systems in life and in the body. Family history, things like that, to see what might be going on not only in their life, but also on the nature side, the genetic side of things. So my brain will kind of start turning while they're talking about, okay, are they eating foods that's going to cause a problem with their digestive tract, that's causing inflammation, that's causing pain, or related to being exhausted at the end of the day, or mood swings and things like that, depression, anxiety, all of those diagnoses.
Which you tagged an article right here. Mind-altering microorganisms, the impact of gut microbiota on brain and behavior. Let's just say how fancy this is. It's out of the Laboratory of Neurogastroenterology, Alimentary Pharmabiotic Center, University College of Cork. I just want to say that because it sounds fancy, right? But basically what you're saying, you're not just pulling this stuff out, and that's a big part of this conversation that we'll maybe get into is like, some people just take stuff at face value. They saw it on social media, and they're like, oh, you need to get out in the sun because it's good for you. Well, that's great, and it probably is true, but you also need to know, like we said, the classical training doesn't have to be there, but if it's not there, you better go read the research, and if you don't understand a part, that's where you can build your own classical training, right? Like, I have no clue what this article's talking about in one part. Well, go educate yourself on that. Now you have full permission in my mind to tell a client or a patient about that. But until that point, if you just say, I think sunlight's good for you, well, to a certain point, or it can cause cancer, right?
Yeah.
It absolutely is great for you. So you've kind of traded, maybe not traded, but it's interesting that you started in psychology and now you kind of use your massage table as a couch, right? Right? Because you're saying people kind of want to talk about other health issues, especially if they're not seeing like, man, this is, something's still going on.
Right.
So it kind of opens a window, which if you think about just the nature of massage, right? Like you're really trying to get somebody to go from like an elevated, stressful, like sympathetic level down to parasympathetic, which we know from an emotional standpoint, they're going to open up more. They're going to tell you things they wouldn't normally tell you if they're in this kind of protective fight or flight state. So I think that's really interesting that you use that, maybe not even consciously. It just happens, right? It's kind of that natural flow. And then that leads to that next step that you were talking about of kind of diving into, which would be a very typical functional medicine history, right? Or analysis.
Right.
And for anybody that's not familiar with functional medicine, I'll put some resources or websites, but if you go to a practitioner that is truly trained in this, I mean, the history is nauseating.
It's extensive. I've been there for a long time.
You're going through your childhood, you're going through familial stuff, genetic stuff, diet, lifestyle, everything you said, but it's tedious, it's a lot. But the reason being is think how complex we are. We are not necessarily, I sprained my ankle, my ligaments hurt, fix me.
Right.
That happens for sure, right? But you got to think if somebody comes into you and they're like, my neck has been killing me for 20 years, right? I can't
It's
move
more
it.
common than you think.
This is how I turn my neck, right? And you're doing a couple massages and you're like, this is not changing, right? You got to ask the question. And if you don't, I don't even think you could call yourself a clinical, practitioner at all. You're just you're really a tactician. You're just doing stuff to people without thought. And I don't think that's your
no, but
MO
it happens.
Yeah, it happens a lot. So yeah, we talked about one article here, and I just kind of want to bring these up because these were really interesting that Samantha gave me. And some of this stuff seems like common sense to you and I, and it's not to some people, right? To think that, man, your gut, which we know in our world is absolutely affecting mood, right? Your gut's called your second brain. Some people think it's your first brain. I listened to a really interesting podcast with a PhD in neuroscience that does basically, I may butcher this, I think it's somatic neuroscience, basically how the skin affects everything, which go back to massage. You got to look at some interesting stuff. But the person interviewing her was like, man, a lot of people think the gut's the second brain. She's like, everything is your brain. She's like, we need to quit separating the human into parts because even that is still a separation or reductionist approach. right? And I love, so, you know, holistic gets thrown out a lot, but that's kind of what it comes down to, right? You treat the person as a human and not like we do massage and then we do diet and then we talk about it.
No.
It's got to be all together, and sometimes it's just heavier in one area. So do you have any, without naming names, obviously, or bringing up pertinent data, do you have any examples of anybody you've worked with where it kind of ran the gambit, where it started in massage, like you said, and then it kind of went into, man, I needed, you know, had to work on nutrition, and that ended up being the biggest part of the equation?
Well, I've a couple people, but I'll start with one. I had a man come in that he had an accident a long time ago, maybe like 20 years ago, like you said, with the neck. And his arms were going numb, his hands were tingling, he was having headaches, he was tired all the time, and he was having a lot of anger issues. And these were just things that I didn't even have to ask them. They're things that when he comes in and lays down on the table, I look at the chart and it's like pages of what's going on. So I just start out with a general massage, work with him, work on his neck, see if there's maybe some stuff going on in the front, in the pec, see if anything's impinging, what's going on with the arms. And we probably worked for maybe almost a month, once a week. So, you know, maybe a little bit longer because he had so much going on. But during that time, he gave me a history verbally throughout sessions that made me think like, okay, you're eating cheeseburgers and you're eating like whole grains and all these things, which, you know, whole grains sounds healthy.
We've been indoctrinated to think a lot of things are healthy just via marketing, yeah.
But so a lot of the food was like diet, sugar-free, low-fat. That coupled with his accident, I mean, I don't know the history as far as if there were a brain injury or something like that related to the anger. But what we saw as we started to talk and work together, he started to change some of his diet habits. And then he started to change some of his exercise habits. So he was going out, he was bike riding, he was walking, nothing too intense, just to start out. And the change that I saw in this man was substantial.
And those are small changes, relatively, right? Like it wasn't this like gross like diet change and all these supplements. I mean, you literally just tweaked it a little bit. Yeah.
He so the first day that he came in to see me, he was almost in tears because of how just angry and just like stuck he was in this body that was uncomfortable. Yeah. And he had gone to the doctor. They tell him everything's fine continuously because there's nothing blipping on the blood work. And by the end of the last session, I still work with him. He came in and hugged me and he was smiling. I'm like, how are you doing? He's like, I got to play with my kids the other day. They're eating healthier. You know, I'm sure the wife's happier that they're all eating healthier too. His life has changed. And I didn't do that. I literally just opened the door, sent him some articles, sent him some information, and just kind of enter in that way so people can take the initiative and go that route.
And what you just said there is you didn't do it. See, that is humility, which you absolutely, it's just crucial for life overall. But the cool thing is, like, I don't know how many times I tell people that, like, I'm not doing anything to fix you. Like, a guy left yesterday and he goes, I don't know what you did to my hip. And of course, he says something like, you put my hip back in, which I never told him that. So please, nobody's putting your hip back in. But he felt so much better. He's like, I don't know what you did. I was like, I didn't do it. Yeah. Like, you saw me 4 or 5 times, and over the course of the 4 or 5 visits, you put in the work outside of here. That's where change came. And like, it seems like magic to some people. Like, I just thought this was never going to go away. It was never going to change. And it's like, you made the change. I was more of that facilitator, that director, that educator. And the education component, I mean, people know like doctor means, you know, teacher. And like, that's all we're doing is we're teaching people. And like we said, you gave him very minimal change, but in massive areas of your life, right? Like, you could have said, well, let's try some, B vitamins because that's usually good for elevating mood and stuff. But you didn't have to do that, right?
Right.
Now, once you feel good and you're like, hey, I want to feel better, right? That's where we start diving down these deep rabbit holes or biohacking or whatever you want to call it. But that's such a great example because there are probably a ton of people watching this out there that don't feel great, right? That have had similar issues. And we all probably know deep down what we're doing that's actually keeping us unwell.
Yeah.
Most people just don't want to admit it, right? So most of us would say, well, even people that are healthy, right? There's air quotes if you're listening to the podcast right now.
Yes.
Because you can be crushing workouts every day, right? You could be going to CrossFit, you could be running 80 miles a week, and your diet could be awesome, and you could be getting out in the sun, you could be drinking a lot of water, and if your emotional life sucks, well, everything else is going to pay the price. And if you mess up any one of those things, if your sleep sucks, it's going to affect everything else. So that's, again, kind of the theme of today's podcast is, you have to treat the person as a human, not these pieces, right?
Yeah. And I think going back to a previous podcast that you had Jake on about where he was talking about, find someone to guide you through your exercise process if you don't know. And even if you do know, you can probably learn something. Where you're talking about going out and crushing runs and CrossFit and all of that. The article I sent you on C-Reactive Protein shows us...
I'll link to all those in the show notes, guys.
That you can be doing all of that, but if you don't have the guidance and maybe to know that you're doing too much too fast, then somebody could walk into my office or yours and look perfectly healthy. They seem happy, everything's great, but they're tearing their body up inside, and that marker will tell us that. And that's why I think the blood work is so important, because when you do blood work to look for signs of situations that are happening on the inside, what's happening on the outside we're seeing is imperative. And I think that people that don't have blood work done, maybe we can teach them a little bit about why it's helpful, not just your annual physical where we run some levels, you look good, great, see you next year, here's your medication. And I love that you guys talk about that as well.
Well, and so for anybody that's not familiar, C-reactive protein is basically an inflammatory marker for chronic inflammation. It's not necessarily acute inflammation.
Right.
And the article that Samantha gave me says C-reactive protein, chronic low back pain, and diet and lifestyle. So it's basically showing how basically these contributing factors affect this marker. And as Samantha referenced, we repeatedly say supplements are there to supplement the diet, but then we don't know if you need a supplement if we don't have any values. It's just like if somebody came in and I said, I want to improve your toe touch, and I didn't look at it first. That doesn't make any sense, and everybody gets that. But for some reason, if somebody comes in and they're like, I read on Google that most people are vitamin D deficient, so I started taking it, that may be true, and you may have hit it, but at the same time, who knows? So, just the fact that you may be spending money that's just frivolous, right?
Yeah.
B, do you really need it? But when you start taking things like vitamin D is fairly benign, right? You can't basically overdose on it. When you get into things like taking individual B vitamins, Sloan and I have had the conversation about BCAAs. When you get into supplementation and stuff, you can mess other stuff up, right? Just like if I did too much running, you pay the price in other areas of your life. So a really good thing can get negative real quick. So this is kind of a very specific question because I just kind of want to throw some stuff at you. And you do a lot of different types of massage, and you pre and postnatal is very different. We do a lot of work with kids and talking about this functional medicine model. A lot of this stuff would be really nice to start early in life, right?
Yes.
So we don't run it because a lot of the things that happen early in life manifest way later. So just briefly, can you touch on why that is important, just for anybody that's not familiar, has never even realized that was a thing?
As far as the prenatal and infant, yes. So,
and I know I said brief, and you're probably like, "Oh my gosh, that's not a brief question."
I'll get it together. So, basically, when we're talking about the importance of prevention and we're talking about planning, if you can, as a woman who is planning to become pregnant or to have a family, get started on your stress relief now, because that has major implications for your child and their development later. So their demeanor, their personality, how they handle the stressors that come at them in the world. And massage sounds benign. I mean, it sounds like a nice spa day, but truly touch actually can affect all of the things in your body, your neurotransmitters, your hormones, all of that. So start early with yourself as a mom and a dad so that the whole family is healthy.
Yeah.
But then work on that with your infant. So, I mean, we can start as early as 3 weeks with an infant, teaching a parent how to provide that touch for them and how that will later bring them into a better way of handling the life and like the stress in life.
Which is really needed nowadays, which I was just reading an article yesterday that was a longitudinal study looking at, I can't remember what time frame it was. I think it was during the economic recession of the 80s. So basically mothers that were pregnant during that time, looking at kids that like I could be in that time frame and seeing kind of the things that developed with these people and had a propensity to be elevated, which lifestyle plays a big component, but that when you take the mass look at it, like you just saw that group was overall elevated compared to the like 5 to 10 years outside of that kind of top of the bell curve. So that's absolutely crucial, and that's what this article was talking about, which I'll link in the show notes. The other thing is, if you think about what's going on today, which I think the jury's still out, there's a lot of theories, but when you see things like spectrum disorders like autism and Asperger's and things like that are off the charts, right? And some people think this is diet. Some people think it's absolutely what's happening to the parent, and then it's an epigenetic kind of trickle down in utero, postpartum. But what is the one thing that kind of those spectrum disorders all share is usually those kids are very touch averse, right? And the fact that if we can go in and you can help a mom reduce stress prior, right? You can get the kid being, because the thing is with autism, that's going to be a diagnosis that doesn't come till a little bit later, right? So you can't do that in the first 3 months of life. It just doesn't show up because they don't have they don't talk, right? So we don't know, are they, nonverbal and all those things. So if you're already working on that, even if we don't know, again, it's benign medicine, right? It can't hurt, and there's only beneficial effects to it. But nowadays, it just made me more important than it ever has been. Well,
it's interesting that you brought up the autism spectrum. That's actually where I did almost all of my research on cognition in undergrad. And coming from back there...
Glasses aren't just for looks. She's super smart.
And I can't see at all. But coming from there all the way to where I am now, and the training that I've had in different facets, all the way up to working with children now that have autism on touch aversion and sensory integration work in massage, I've done that. But really, it's working with the parent, like you said, before any of this happens, all the way down to how did the pregnancy go? How was the delivery? Was there a C-section? Was it a vaginal birth? Those things play a role later on when we look at the autism spectrum, and things that we can change or we can talk about changing. The diet, probiotics, prebiotics, they've all in research been found to affect autism and the responses to touch, and I guess overall just being social. The child becomes more social, more apt to have a conversation or to initiate eye contact when we look at the research on the microbiome.
Which again goes back to how the gut is going to affect basically basically how you produce neurotransmitters, but also when you get into like some of the things that I didn't necessarily understand until I did it myself when I got my genetic report and went into the raw data and used some other websites like Live Well and Strategene, like how those basically genetic SNPs will determine a lot of your personality, right? So knowing that stuff, and you don't even have to get that nitty gritty, right? You can almost take a more macro view and say, man, like why are you so angry all the time, right? Why do you have a short fuse? And then knowing how the gut affects that, you don't necessarily have to attack specific genetic SNPs. You can say, man, have you tried getting a little more tryptophan in your diet or 5-HTP, because we know that helps with serotonin, and that has a kind of overall cascade, right? Rather than let's jump right to that SSRI because you're depressed and angry and anxious all the time, right? And then you see kids, which this goes without saying, talked about in the first episode, ADHD medication. I'll have to look at what the stat was again. I think it was 68% of kids that are diagnosed with ADHD, which was, I think, 3.2 million, are on some sort of medication.
Yeah.
But in my mind, ADHD is nothing more than which it is, it's an anxiety form. And you got to think, if your gut is out of whack from, like you said, from, in utero to lack of basically the vaginal microbiome through a vaginal birth versus C-section, all this stuff is affected. So at the end of the day, kind of, if we distilled this whole conversation down, what you'd have to say is, starting from the time you're a kid to when you die, you have to be a self-health advocate. You can only do that by being properly educated. And I would hope that everybody that has kids would want to educate themselves for their kids. But I think what's lacking here, and what I think will be interesting, is if this functional medicine model takes over, will you see health education change in schools, right? So health class was something we took 1 year, I think 6th or 7th grade, mainly so you could talk about sex while you're going through puberty.
Yeah.
And that was really the main thing, right? You talked about some STDs, you talked about, I don't even know. It was usually puberty and STDs. I mean, they wanted to have a sex talk, yeah. But why don't we have, physical education, PE has went drastically downhill, right? And that's just atrocious. I think there should be movement competency education in schools from the time that you're pre-K all the way till high school, which would save probably a ton of money on musculoskeletal complaints down the road. But also, why are we not learning about our own body besides in science class, right? We learn very basic biology, physiology. Most kids don't have anatomy in the standard curriculum. So the thing that you're walking around in, reading the books about American history and stuff, you don't even learn about, which to me is just insane. I just don't understand that. It's like if I bought a brand new Mercedes, or I had a patient that got a friggin' awesome brand new Porsche, and she had it a day, and she goes, I don't even know how to do anything in this. Like, I'll have to have somebody go teach me. She's not going to read the manual. She's going back to the dealership to have somebody teach her how to use a Porsche.
Well,
but we're unwilling to take the time to, if you're watching this, you're already one step ahead, to talk to somebody or go read a book or look at more videos like this. But how crazy is that?
I see that a lot. People are willing to do that with electronics. They're willing to do that with going to the store to find out about a pair of sneakers.
I should have done that for our podcast equipment. We had a little malfunction, so I should have read the manual on it.
We figured it out. Trial and error.
Where would you point somebody? Like, I know you can educate people, but what are some resources that you pull from? Or if somebody was like, hey, I want to learn more about diet or just living a better life, do you have any general kind of suggestions on where they could go to find that stuff?
It would depend on, I think, your ability to sift through scientific information. But first and foremost, I always go to research journals. Now, that may seem unavailable to the general public, but every article that I sent you, I pulled from my own repertoire of research in databases, but they're all available on Google Scholar. For free.
Yeah.
So if you know what you're looking for, so say you read something on social media that is that seems kind of interesting, but it's like a picture of a piece of fruit with all the health benefits that you don't know if that's true. You can go to places like Google Scholar, and that's where you can start. And from there, on the bottom of research articles are a lot of different articles that they pulled from. That's how I get to the next thing. Now, if you're not somebody that really wants to sift through all of that...
We're not saying everybody has to go be an academic,
go
not
read
at research. And that's why, if they don't want to do that, I think they should seek out somebody to help them with that process.
Well, that, and there's now actual mainstream books that are not research articles that don't make sense, that break it down. Doctors that have MDs who have stepped outside of Western medicine, cardiologists, neurologists, written books about their experience and how they're helping patients in, we'll call it complementary alternative medicine versus functional medicine now, that give it to you in digestible bits, even audiobooks, Audible. all of these things are available. Just make sure that it's written by a reputable source.
And that's always tough, right? You're like, there's so many books on Amazon. There's so many videos like this out there. How do you know? I'm not saying just because somebody cites research in a book or a video or anything that means anything, because research could be funded by the people that want to get the info out there. The research could be not great whatsoever, and we just bring the data to light that we want to, which is a very common thing with research. What we're saying is you're going to see the cream rise to the top, and there's always going to be the people that float around the top that are there because they're great marketers or charismatic. So you have to kind of sift through that. But at the end of the day, it's going to shake out, in my opinion, the people that are there with the good intent, good information, right? And then they're going to people that are there for the long haul. Like you see people, even the people that are becoming more mainstream, like Dr. Mark Hyman, right? This very charismatic, marketable guy, but he also has written a lot of books, and he's been around for, I don't know, a long time now, right? Talking about things that now are very common, but like, was not common when he started talking about it. Same thing with like David Seaman, and I mean and these are chiropractors for the most part, but have you read any good books lately that you've pulled any good info from that you're like, man, this is not necessarily a layman's book, but it kind of distilled the information from the research. They tied it together really well.
I have, and I think when I look for those books, I look for what does this person have to gain. So it's not just, okay, was this person not making a living and they needed to just write something to now financially gain from that. I look at people who have not been funded by a pharmaceutical company per se. I look at people who are already functioning fine in life that have nothing to gain. So per se, I'm reading a book right now, which is kind of a controversial title. It's called Undoctored. And the author's name is just jumping from my mind right now. I believe it's similar. I think he also helped on Grain Brain, Wheat Belly, all that kind of information. But he is phenomenal. He's a cardiologist, or was a cardiologist, whose father died from a heart attack. And he went from there, was well off, and just wants to create, I guess you would call it a community online, to do a lot of what I'm trying to do. Show people you can get your own blood work, you can have it looked at by people that have nothing to gain from it. Don't take that at face value, but then you have information, educated information to bring to your doctor and chat about. So you don't just get shut down with, here's a statin or something like that.
And that's Dr. William Davis is who wrote Undoctored. And you said like people should be advocating to go out there and get their own information, basically, right? Get your own lab values, do all these things. And in the musculoskeletal world, we're constantly trying to more or less standardize, right? Like diagnoses or like diagnostic procedures, so we can kind of have a better communication platform. But like we send people for lab work all the time. We made the decision because we were offered to make money off those lab tests. We said no.
Right.
Because if I'm sending somebody for a test, I don't want to make money off of it, because then I do have some sort of underlying incentive to go do that. Same reason that there are laws created called the Stark laws, where a physician cannot own part of an imaging facility, right? Because you can't be sending people to get a test so you make money off of it, because then we just see a bunch of tests. Does it still happen? Do people still own imaging equipment and consistently use imaging without any cause? Absolutely. Yes. Do people do lab values? Yeah, that's one of the reasons that American healthcare costs so darn much, is the overuse of tests and procedures and diagnostic imaging when we don't need it. Which is one more, and I kind of want to wrap up on this. It goes back to your point with the example you used, where the intervention with the gentleman that had been in the car accident was very low level, right? It was, hey, move a little more, get outside, change your diet a little bit, right? Not even, like, you didn't give him a diet. You said just kind of eat different. I
gave him some information on what could be considered healthy versus not healthy on what he's seen out in the media.
Right. So what I see most of the time, and this is not just me, it's probably most people, what you see in the medical realm is we jump right to the most advanced thing. We talked about this before. So it comes in treatment, right? We jump right to surgery. Yeah. But we usually jump right to advanced testing, right? So especially if you come in with somebody that it's hard to answer the question. Hey, I've had neck pain for 20 years, and we let's say we even start with like a typical x-ray, just rule out red flags, and they're like, oh, which I can't tell me how many people come in, they're like, they did an x-ray and nothing's wrong. Well, that's fantastic. That tells
He
us,
had an x-ray.
right, and that tells us nothing.
Yeah.
Literally nothing. But what we should understand is you may not need a whole lot of tests. You could start with interventions, right? Good interventions that are benign, right? If we start doing crazy stuff, like if somebody came in, like, I can't see out of my right eye and my face is numb and I'm going to adjust their neck. Whoa, bad idea with somebody with neck pain. Yeah. But if somebody comes in and they're like, you know what, my neck's been hurting for years. Well, let's move around a little more, right? Let's do some stuff that can't hurt, you can only help. That trumps every day, and this is not my opinion, this is research-based. A trial of care from a good conservative management standpoint always trumps diagnostic imaging. I don't know if there are stats out there. I would almost guess that basically low-level intervention of diet change or some sort of alteration there would trump blood work even, which we're not saying not to get blood work, because we don't even understand completely what we're looking at on blood work. Because the pathologic norms change per genetics and lifestyle and age and sex. But at the same time, just because your vitamin D level is low does not mean that a supplement's going to fix it. It may be other stuff in your life.
Well,
right?
And they're usually, like you're saying, the 1 out of 100 people that we need to see the blood works, there's this thing wrong that nobody's seen. Usually the people I see are people that are generally healthy. They're functioning in society. They're not passing out or can't see or things that maybe might come to you.
Where that higher level intervention probably is needed, yeah.
It's general people who are having weight trouble, who are having lifestyle issues that when they change, they're happier, they want to keep doing, they feel better, so they keep making better choices. So we don't always need those things.
Yeah, which is the bulk of people, right? We're not saying the Western medical system is bad. That is really, in my mind, I think it should just not be called the medical system. Like, we have an emergency room, but that's almost what the entire Western medical system has become, right?
Yeah.
Very specialized, very high level, like it's got to be the last step, but it's usually the first step. And as we're changing, both because the cost of healthcare has went up, so those high level interventions have basically, the market has outpaced what people are able to afford, right? They're like, hey, pre-existing condition means the surgery isn't going to be covered. It's on you to pay for it now. Well, maybe I'll go try some other stuff first.
Right. Now
so it's kind of funny that you're forced or your arm's being twisted to go do the stuff that you probably should be doing in the first place anyways.
Yep, I agree. And that's actually very much what this book talks about. So if you're
And
interested in that, it's helpful.
we're not sponsored by Dr. Davis.
I couldn't even remember
his name. But if he wants
name.
to sponsor us, you can call us, Dr. Davis. I haven't read this book yet. I'll look at it. Or maybe
I'll give it to him when I'm done.
Anything else you want to end on? Any sage advice? Is there anything that you constantly find yourself telling the people you work with over and over? Is there just kind of a recurring theme?
Probably when you're starting to work in looking at information or work with someone like you or me, it's not always a linear process. So a lot of times we go to see the doctor and it's like, okay, great, here's a pill, you're going to feel better tomorrow. But if you stop taking it, you're going to start feeling bad again. You come see somebody like you or I or anybody in our field, you're going to sometimes hit a wall of frustration where it's not going as fast as you want or in the direction you want. But be patient and work with your body, because that to me has been all the difference for people that have been successful in what I work with them on.
And that's really good advice, and it's hard to take, right? It's almost sometimes just as hard as actually doing the things that you need to change in the first place, right? Like exercise and diet and lifestyle modification. It's hard to realize, it usually takes a long time to get to where you are, but your body's complex, and that's why it's not linear, right? It is multifaceted, and just like you said, that's awesome to end on, is you can't, at the end of the day, maybe that's why it's so important to have somebody like you helping somebody. It is the education component, but it's almost kind of that, it's a revisit, right? And you don't want to say you're a motivator and a rah-rah person, but it's like, hey, this is normal. And also let's tweak something, or maybe we don't need to tweak. You got to press through, or it's just, this is normal, right? Yeah. Complete setback is normal, or we're not where we would want to be in the amount of time.
Absolutely.
We're not going to American this thing. We're not going to pop a pill and get there in a week. It may take a couple months, but it's going to be worth it. And that's kind of a theme at the farm here, right? You gotta put the work in to make the change, and if you're not willing to do that, nothing's gonna happen.
Well, that's why I'm here with you guys.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you.